Ladies and gentlemen, the following contest, it is set for one fall. Introducing first, from Lithuania, he weighs 123 kilos, the Russian nightmare, Nikita Koloff.
Welcome back to another episode, Man Up with Nikita Koloff. Real talk with real men with real stories. And in the studio today, I have a real story for you and a real man, a man who goes way back with me, back in the days of wrestling, Terry Allen. You may know him better if you're a wrestling fan as Magnum TA. Terry, welcome to the Man Up Show.
Man, it's such a pleasure to be here, Nick. It's always good when we get together, and this forum here just makes it even more special.
Yeah, and it's special to have you here because you have such an amazing story. And of course, as I mentioned, our history does go back, I think, around 1984, 85-ish, back in that timeline, right?
Yeah, when I first came to the Crockett's, it was December of 84, and we were sharing our ring shortly thereafter.
We were, of course, we can talk a little bit about that. The most infamous matches from the fan perspective that they refer to me as the best of 7 series that you and I had against each other. That was memorable in many fans' lives. It
made an impact for people across the nation, because back then the Cold War was going on with Russia, and you were slightly hated at the time.
Slightly. They loved to hate me, yes. They sure did. In fact, Rick Joyner, the founder of Morningstar Ministries, anytime he typically introduces me, a lot of times he'll say, the most hated man in the world. And I'm like, Rick, in the world of wrestling, I'm not on the post office wanted list, right? But so to your point, though.
No, it was a special time, and it's something it would be very hard to try to recreate in modern times. So, I mean, we were very much in touch with the fans and what was going on in the world, and it just all came together like the perfect conflict.
It really did. The chemistry of all of that, and you know, your persona that you built in those wrestling days as Magnum TA, kind of the all-American boy, you know, so to speak. But let's do that before we jump into some of that. Let's, for our viewers out there, let's go back to give just a little bit of backstory on Terry Allen and kind of some of your history there, because you have a whole amateur wrestling background, and there's more to the story.
Absolutely. I grew up in Chesapeake, Virginia, and only child, so I didn't have big brothers to look up to and kind of point me along the way to find sports and athletics and things to do. And I had been a fan of professional wrestling from the time I can remember watching television with my dad when I was like 7, 8 years old.
Wow. Okay.
But I never found a sport to latch onto, like Little League baseball or football or any of those kind of things. But I got introduced to amateur wrestling in an 8th grade gym class, and the school that I was attending was just starting a wrestling team. So I was like the charter member of this newly found team that they were cultivating, and so I started out and somebody had given me a book about Dan Gable and his very inspirational story and what he had done in achieving an Olympic goal, and he was a very inspirational role model for me in that capacity. So I started in amateur. I was not a natural athlete. It wasn't like a big success story right out of the chute. Lost every match except for the last match I had my freshman year, which I remember vividly, because you got one win. The last one, that's a pretty big deal.
That's a big deal. That's right.
But I built myself up from literally like the old comic strips where they used to have the guy that got sand kicked in his face on the beach for the
100-pound weakling.
And I literally built myself from nothing to, by the time I was a senior, I was 167 pounds and ended up being the state champion in Virginia in 1977.
Wow.
And took third in the Nationals that year, and then went on to go to college. And I entered my college career still trying to wrestle at 167 pounds, and unbeknownst to me, I was about to hit a new spurt, a growth spurt. And I wasn't growing up, but I was putting on size and muscle that I wasn't prepared for. So I dieted basically my entire high school career, and suddenly I found myself creeping up over 200 pounds. And my coaches wanted me to go back down. I suddenly realized that I could be a much bigger specimen than what I had allowed myself to be all these years. And I started working out with power lifters and bodybuilders and muscle heads in Virginia Beach at a place called Waring's Gym. And before I knew it, I was pushing 220 pounds. And it was at that time, while going to college and simultaneously working security in the nightclubs down at the beach, that I saw the wrestlers start coming in after they'd wrestled in Norfolk Scope. And I started talking with them. They got in my ear, and I saw the kind of money that they were making. And in 1978, hearing people making six figures was like you were a millionaire to me.
Wow, right.
That was unheard of. So the opportunities suddenly became more enticing to me than anything else I could think about.
Then pursuing maybe an amateur wrestling career or something of that nature. And you bring a couple things to mind for me. One, I remember back in my high school days, my PE teacher was named Pete Grigelko. It's a good wrestling name, right? But he was also the wrestling coach. Man, he tried to talk me into going into wrestling, but I watched some of my buddies trim or cut the weight, and I'm like, man, I like eating too much, man. I don't want to be losing weight. I want to be gaining weight or putting weight on, like you're talking about. And so you might say, would forego wrestling and focus on football, because that was my passion, my dream. Anyway, the other thing comes to mind is you brought back the memory of familiar at Waring's Gym. I have many a workout with all the brothers there, the boys of Waring's Gym, the brothers that own that place, and know that place only too well. So.
And what was so unique was all the disciplines that I applied from the ninth grade through my senior year of high school, preparing and doing all the things I did in the amateur wrestling ranks, were the same things I was now applying on a whole nother scale to accomplish a different goal. So now I'm trying to build myself into this bigger, better version of myself, and also trying to wrap my head around what it really it takes to be successful in this wrestling world. And I had people talking to me on the side. Greg Valentine was one of them, and a guy named Buzz Sawyer had approached me and talked to me. And I realized quickly that you don't become, in my time, like an overnight sensation. You needed to learn the ropes and learn your craft before you got exposed to the world. This was before cable television had exploded. So I left my home, which I'd never lived more than 20 miles away from my parents in my life, and ended up on the other side of the United States in Portland, Oregon.
Yeah, and I'm familiar with, of course, you've shared some of that story in the past. So just to recap, so you had this really stellar amateur career going, and that catapulted you into a college career. But you have this size explosion. You run into these professional wrestlers who kind of put this bug in your ear to, hey, you might want to consider becoming a professional wrestler. So you pull the trigger, so to speak, and you decide to do that. And your story is similar to mine in the sense that I had no training, no background of any kind in wrestling, and yours is similar to that, right? So you end up in Portland, and what happens?
Well, it's a really much longer story than we have time for right now. But to make a long story short, I ended up following Buzz Sawyer to Portland because he had made promises to me to help me get into the business. And when I showed up on his doorstep to let him make good on that promise, he introduced me to the promoter, Don Owens, as if I had already been wrestling.
Okay.
Which I had not been in a ring. I hadn't put on a pair of boots, a pair of trunks, nothing. And so the guy says, great to meet you. You start Saturday and you'll be on my TV. And that's just great. And so Buzz and I and another woman wrestler named Princess Victoria meet up one afternoon, work out in the ring for 3 hours, in which time I learned everything that they could shove down my throat for me to absorb. And the next day, I'm on live television, and here we go. And I never looked back. I never had another training session, Nothing. It was learning,
on the job training.
Yes.
Which that's where our stories are very similar in that. So you had 3 more hours of preparation than I had prior to my television debut, and that I had on the job training as well. And so we fast forward your story, like you said. There's so much more to the story. So you're out in the Northwest. So you go all the way across country to the Northwest, Portland, Oregon, from Chesapeake, Virginia, all the way across country, and then you end up. I know you had stints along the way. I know in the Mid-South with Cowboy Bill Watts down to the Mid-South, Florida, right? And
yeah, Florida actually before that, and it's down in Florida where I met Dusty, who was so influential in both our careers.
Yes,
and so when I met you. In the end of '84, I'd actually been in the ring wrestling 7 nights a week for 4 years.
Okay.
Though nobody knew me because there was no
there wasn't cable TV, there wasn't pay-per-view television. There was a magazine on our shelf behind you there. There's some pictures from some of the Pro Wrestling Illustrated, So that's the only way people really back in those days could really follow professional wrestling, more or less, right? It was just local TV markets. So yeah, you came to the Carolinas. You were an unknown quantity, so to speak, right?
Right, and in reality, I've had like 1,400 matches.
Wow!
At that point in time.
Wow!
So
and so you had much more experience under your belt at that point, because even at that time, Terry, you come in December of 1984. I've got 6 months experience under my belt. You've got 4 years experience, and. But yet, as we began to build and tell a storyline there where you and I would, as we talked about earlier in the show, that you and I would, to Dusty, you mentioned Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream, who's one of the greatest creative geniuses, I feel like, in professional wrestling, comes up with the idea of a best of 7 series for the U.S. heavyweight title, right? And the chemistry between you and I, as people go back and watch those matches, still common to this day.
Never apologize for who you are. Be who God has called you to be, and be it boldly.
Hi, Nikita Koloff here, and I am excited to announce the first annual Morning Star Men's Conference, August 25th to the 27th. Our theme this year, Man Up. It's time. And we have a phenomenal lineup of speakers, including NBA All-Star Al Wood, WWE Superstar Lex Luger, Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin, David and Jason Benham, the Benham Brothers, Chris Reed, and of course Dr. Rick Joyner. And let's not forget world-renowned evangelist Frank Shelton. Click the link below and sign up early. You do not want to miss this event.
Well, intensity was something that was a moniker for me and for you as well. So when you take two sides colliding with that same intensity, you can't have anything but magic unless you don't make it through the first one and you both can't continue.
Right.
But it was so intense, and by having multiple occasions for people to be able to see us. It wasn't like a one-shot wonder. It went on for some people felt like was months,
right.
But it really wasn't that long. But that best of 7 series was just, telling that story, just like the basketball days with Jordan. That's where it all derived from.
Yep, and of course it was many of those were a part of what was known as the Great American Bash Tour, and so ultimately the Russian Nightmare, the epitome of evil, if you will, would overcome and become the United States heavyweight champion, and then that led to, of course, rematches and big business back in those days for us. But let's fast forward, because you were even as a part of that, you were being groomed to become next world heavyweight champion, dethrone the Nature Boy Ric Flair, and you were only days away from, I remember you telling me the story, flying to New York to really kind of ink that deal when something disrupted your future.
Absolutely. And in the blink of an eye, October 14, 1986, 5 minutes from my home, car hydroplanes on a wet road. I lose control of it, broadside a telephone pole, hit my head on the roof, compression fracture my C5 vertebrae, and was instantly paralyzed from the neck down at 27 years old. And not anything anybody would ever want to experience.
Sure.
But for an athlete and someone that makes their living with their abilities to do superhuman things, that is unfathomable kind of news to receive. And it was I still remember it like it was yesterday. I remember the moment. I remember the doctor looking down over me, because I never lost consciousness during this whole thing, and telling me I had 1,000,000 to 1 shot of ever doing anything other than just sitting in a wheelchair and have somebody feed me and take care of me the rest of my life.
Yeah, feed you, take care of you, bathe you. I mean, everything that comes with being what the original, I remember, at least I heard, diagnosis of quadriplegia, right?
I couldn't move anything but my head.
Yeah, and so I mean, you are a true, in a sense, walking miracle. I mean, because you have the ability to walk and work and have a family, and you got a beautiful family, and you got twins, right? You got quite a number of children, but the youngest are twins, right?
I have 14 years old, yeah.
Yeah, 14-year-old twins, and because you've raised a beautiful family, a lovely wife, and you've been out there in the marketplace working all these years, and still sustaining yourself, which again is a miracle. And I know you attribute that to just your faith in the Lord, and sustained you through that, right?
Well, more so than all that, we all live through seasons of our life and different phases and different perspectives as you have time to reflect. And I was raised in the church, and I'd given my commitment to the Lord at a very young age, but didn't really know what all that meant. Didn't know what that relationship meant.
Okay.
Realized he had died for my sins and he was my Lord and Savior, but never realized anything to do with the relationship that we can have with him. Because I didn't have any mentors around me showing me that way. And so I was kind of finding my way along, feeling my way through the dark. And even when I had this catastrophic accident, I didn't even really realize then what kind of relationship he and I could have. All I did was ask for the strength to endure what was before me, because I was in the hospital for 5 months doing rehab, and then 1.5 years of outpatient rehab after I got out of the hospital. So I knew I had this terrible road ahead of me, and I felt it was so catastrophic that hoping for a complete recovery was just completely unrealistic. But I knew that if I could endure the task of what was being asked of me, that I could reach some level of function and something that was completely mind-boggling to the experts,
right?
And it was real. So I wasn't laying around saying, woe is me, or Lord, take this from me. I was asking him to give me the strength to do what I needed to do. And he was faithful to do that. But I realized over time and through studying and delving into just my inner soul, was that anything that becomes such a distraction to us that takes away from our relationship with our Heavenly Father is all of a sudden becomes your God. So it's very difficult as an athlete, as we're so goal-driven,
right,
we're so focused, so intense to get to this place, get to this thing, that if getting to the thing becomes more important to you than anything in the world, that you just, you'll die for whatever it takes to get there, and forget that all these abilities you have are a gift that is given from above. Wow. That you have nothing, no part of, no matter how hard you worked, no matter how many hours you put in, it's still a gift. And so when you lose that perspective, then you can get a Godsmack.
Yeah.
Okay? So I'm not saying God had me hit a telephone pole. I'm saying he took an opportunity to wake me up, to get my attention, to realize that if you realized all the things that you wanted to do in your life, that would become then your main focus. It would be your achievement, what you did, your work, rather than he that is in us. giving us the strength to do all things through Christ. And as a young man and an immature man, you don't have the wisdom that can only come from him to realize those things. I try to impart that on people through example, because telling them and them not seeing it, the fruit of it, is hard to wrap your head around. But I don't want to digress. So the big thing that I realized was that, let's say God's just said, in 6 months' time, you're going to become 100% physically of everything that you were. And the reward would have been, I could have been the world's heavyweight champion how many times, made millions of dollars, and done all these things that could have taken my eye off of the relationship that is the most important relationship we can have.
Wow.
I mean, it's not a simple thing. It's hard to digest. But the reality of it is, if we got everything that we wish our hearts desire, our fleshy hearts, we would forget how we got it.
Man, it's really a good word, Terry. I hope the viewers are paying attention to what you just said, and one takeaway for me is how God turned a tragedy into triumph and drew you into a much deeper relationship with Him than prior to the accident. And so you embraced it that way. Let me ask you this, because believe it or not, we're almost out of time. It's unbelievable how the time really flies on these shows. But if you were to give some sort of maybe, if they're not already inspired by your story and the importance of that relationship with Jesus Christ, what might you say to men? If you took 60, 90 seconds, you looked into that camera, what would you want to say to men specifically?
Well, all of us, no matter what station we are in life, are mentors. Whether you realize it or not, you're influencing children, you're influencing coworkers, you're influencing your spouse, your loved ones. They watch us all every day and how we react to the trials and tribulations, to the challenges, to all the things that we face in life. We're mentoring somebody by example of how we conduct ourselves. So as men, my challenge to you is to realize each and every day that it's not just about you. It's about how you affect other people by the way you conduct yourself as a man of God, if that's what you claim to be, is a big deal. And it doesn't have to be on a grand stage. It can be going to and from work, how you conduct yourself from start to finish. And when you don't think anybody's looking, somebody's looking. You're making a difference in somebody's life.
Wow, that's a good word, Terry. Well, you are a true story of inspiration, and you epitomize what I feel, what it looks like to be an overcomer. And we're just going to have you back sometime. Maybe we'll talk more wrestling, but I think what you said here in the last half of the show is really what people needed to hear. And I can't think, I'm so grateful for our friendship. You're a trusted brother in the Lord. I just love you and your family, and can't thank you enough for spending some time with us today.
My pleasure as always.
Well, God bless you. Tune in for another episode of Man Up with Nikita Koloff, Magnum TA. Terry Allen here, champion in the ring, a champion outside the ring.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Man Up Show. For more content, please visit us at www.morningstartv.com.
Hello, I'm Rick Joyner. I wrote 4 books last year, but these are, I believe, some of the most important I've written in a long, long time, maybe even ever. This one is called The Second American Revolution / Civil War. It came from a dream I had in 2018, a very graphic dream, when the Lord started showing me things that you can see even from the time I had that dream in 2018. This is already unfolding. And anyway, this is about that, and I throw in a lot of the other information and knowledge of what's going on so that we can discern the times and know what to do in them. Now, this is another book I wrote last year, The Awakening. It's about my personal sojourn. I wrote this one One of the most important, I think I've written in a very long time, on Marxism and its strategy for destroying America. How it has almost already finished the job. It's infiltrated our schools, the media, entertainment, virtually across America. And they formulated a 45-point plan in the 1930s for taking over America, the Marxists. And they have just about finished the job. They have very systematically and very patiently gone after every one of these, and I lay out all 45 points, how they have been working those points, and how many have been accomplished, how they did it, and where we are now, and what we need to do to reverse this. It is not too late, but if we don't act soon, we're going to lose our democratic republic to this ultimate evil and this ultimate enemy of liberty and freedom. We have to understand this basic military principle. You cannot defeat an enemy you do not see. And to see means to understand it, to be able to perceive it as it's working against you. And I believe when you read this book, you're going to see all of the places that it is now manifesting itself and seeking to take over our country. Lieutenant General Jerry Boyk and myself wrote this book together on the principles of war, taken from Clausewitz's 12 Principles of War. You know, Jerry and I used to teach this. He would teach each principle, lay out the military application, and then I would take each principle and lay out how you could apply the same principle in business and schools and missions and virtually any endeavor. And it helps to plan strategically, have clear objectives. And there's a saying, those who do not know the principles of war are going to be used and will serve those who do. Well, these are simple, easy to understand. Jerry had 36 years in military, one of our greatest military warriors in our generation. And I've been studying military history and history in general since I was 15 years old, studied Marxism since I was 19 years old. But we combined and condensed that knowledge into something you can read in just a few hours. It's powerful, it's written to the point, succinctly. We try not to waste any words, but you can get it and start applying these. And I believe to the degree that you apply them, you are going to be successful. We're going to let you have all of these together, and we're going to pay the shipping. You're not going to pay anything but $49 for all 4 of these books together. And I believe you're going to be so glad you got these and have read them, because every one of them is relevant to our times today.